Hello. Let's see. Will it let me comment today? Nope. Why is that doing that? When it first goes live, it shows me comments and then doesn't. I have no idea why. Which is just so annoying that I then have to open up a second page to be able to see any comments. Sorry that I'm annoyed right now. So, Jax West from Stephen Avery Project, Justice with Jax, and MAM Gossip. Sorry that I don't know if it's Facebook's fault or my computer's fault that it doesn't let me see people's comments, and it doesn't let some people comment. Don't get it. Don't get it. Sorry, I'm annoyed. Anyway, so we're here today continuing. Oh, let me get my keyboard out of the way. Continuing to read Wrecking Crew, which is by John Ferrick, not Kathleen Zellner. People assume, since she's on the cover, that this is her book. It is not. It is John Ferrick. On the back, you can see the picture of John Ferrick. So this is our third week reading the book. Last time I read, we started on chapter 17. Today, we start on chapter 21. We are on page 213 out of 361 pages. So hopefully, we are able to get this done this week. We're live today for 2 hours, and then Wednesday for 2 hours, if needed. As long as I don't have any internet problems. Because we cut it short one day last week because I had spotty service that kept screwing up this video. Or that video, I should say. No idea. Okay, sorry. I keep getting, keep getting distracted on trying to see why I can't get my comments. Anyway, while I'm reading, I won't see your comments or questions, which, I mean, I've got it open on the second page, so maybe I can see over there, but I'm obviously looking at a book. So if somebody poses a question that you can answer, please do. All right. Off we go. I keep trying to look at the other page to see if we have any questions or any. I don't think reminders were posted today that we were going live, so people might not realize it. But anyway, here we go. Chapter 21, Heroes or Goats. In the 2018 Super Bowl, backup quarterback Nick Foles led the Philadelphia Eagles to defeat Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. But after the game, you didn't see crazed football fans storming the field, hoisting Brady on their shoulders, giving him a hero's victory celebration. Of course not. In Avery's murder case, His lawyers, Jerry Buting and Dean Strang, had engineered an unsuccessful defense, and their client got convicted and continues to serve a life prison sentence. And yet the world could not get enough of them. They capitalized on the worldwide notoriety that came from the Making a Murderer documentary series and became like a couple of rock stars. They were booked for countless European media tours to talk about their role on the Avery case. They were the darlings of national television shows, including Dr. Phil. Gross. Dr. Phil is horrible. Quote, Mr. Avery holds Buting and Strang partly responsible for his guilty verdict, despite the Brady violations of the prosecutors, unquote, Zellner said. Those Brady violations have nothing to do with Tom Brady, the losing quarterback in the Super Bowl. Rather, it deals with a federal case law decided by the U.S. Supreme Court that forbids prosecutors and police from hiding and concealing what's known as mitigating evidence, evidence that would be helpful or advantageous to the defendant. Under federal law, prosecutors are expected to provide all information in their possession to the criminal defense's counsel for review as part of the pretrial discovery process. Here's what Zellner has to say about the overall performance of Buting and Strang. Quote, Strang and Buting had a couple of stellar moments in the courtroom, but unfortunately, those moments were not nearly enough to win Mr. Avery's case, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, they failed to hire the necessary experts in blood spatter, ballistics, fire forensics, pathology, trace, and DNA to combat the avalanche of testimony by the state's 14 experts. They got hopelessly bogged down and sidetracked by the blood vial theory, which was easily refuted by the state. They talked a big game about the cops planting evidence, but in the end, they were unable to deliver anything but their own speculative theories, unquote. Based on Zellner's real-life practical experience inside the courtroom, quote, it is always fatal with a jury to promise something and then fail to deliver on the promise. They failed to carefully review the state's discovery disclosures for impeachment evidence to use against the state's witnesses. Their biggest failure in that regard was in failing to call Brian Dassey to impeach would have collapsed. After Making a Murderer aired, Buting and Strang launched a worldwide tour as if they had won rather than lost, unquote. There are people who are making money off this case, and it seems to have become like the bigger deal is going around making money and getting fans. And for a long time, Drizzen and Nyrider weren't part of that whole circus, and now they are as well. And it's just disappointing to me that at times it does seem that a lot of these people are more about money. I guess, yes, you want to keep this case in the news and people thinking about it and knowing that Stephen and Brendan still aren't free. But I know back from when I used to talk to Stephen, an issue he has with especially Buting is they're making all this money off of his name and nobody's giving him a cut. So yeah. Um it 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 leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So, oh, and Cindy's commented, "Hi Cindy, and could not find you." Yeah, I can see on my second page, Cindy, where I have to have up on my other screen. A couple times my video broadcast has been interrupted. I have no idea why, when I do Facebook Live from a group as opposed to a page, that there's all this trouble. Because I was live on Stephen Avery Project last week and I can see comments and everybody can comment and my video's not breaking up. I don't know what the deal is, but I apologize. All right, back to the book. During their pre-trial preparation, Buting and Strang overlooked the actual swabs that may have been tampered with by police in order to produce the perfect DNA specimens that came from the spare key in Avery's bedroom and the highly dubious hood latch DNA search, another 6 months later. Quote, "There is compelling evidence, as we have explained in our pleadings, that Wiegert was involved in switching the hood latch swabs with the groin swabs," Zellner said. Quote, "Hi, Stephanie. A careful examination of the chain of custody forms for the hood latch swabs demonstrates that Wiegert delivered the so-called hood latch swabs to the Wisconsin Crime Lab, but identified another officer as having done so," unquote. Zellner contends that Buting and Strang missed a golden opportunity to destroy the credibility of Colborne's trial testimony, his discovery of the spare key, keyword there, to Teresa Halbach's vehicle. The spare key had suddenly turned up on the carpet near Avery's bed on what marked the 6th time that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's officials went into Avery's tiny bedroom. The key gave Manitowoc County a noteworthy clue to finally tie their murder suspect to the Auto Trader photographer's mysterious disappearance. Quote, "We tried many times to duplicate Colborne's story about manhandling the bookcase, and we could not get the key and lanyard to fall out of the back of the bookcase and land where it did. Also, all of the items on top of the bookcase fell on the floor during our experiments. Another great failing of Buting and Strang was in not subpoenaing the bookcase for trial and requesting Colborne during his cross-examination to come off the stand and demonstrate this miraculous event with the actual key, lanyard, and bookcase for the jury. Colborne could have never replicated what he told the jury happened." Unquote. Zellner has unbelievably high standards in terms of taking new clients. Her law firm has a rigid screening process when it comes to accepting condemned prisoners who insist that they were wrongfully convicted. Quote, "I took the Avery case because I thought if I could demonstrate all of the forensic evidence was planted, it would be a wake-up call to law enforcement, juries, judges, and lawyers that they must start demanding the replication of the forensic evidence before they rely upon it in seeking a conviction," Zellner said. "We have challenged anyone to attempt to replicate the state's forensic evidence used to convict Mr. Avery, and absolutely no one has been able to do so," unquote. During Avery's trial, Strang and Buting put up a valiant effort at one point when they tried to put forth an alternative theory regarding the actual crime scene. But they were up against the mischievous and cocky Sweaty Sweat, who wanted to make sure that his salacious story about a bedroom sex crime murder stuck with the jury's minds. Though they were charred pelvic bones that turned up inside the Manitowoc County quarry several hundred yards south of the Avery property, it appears that Sweaty Sweat did not want to take the risk that these bones were Teresa's, and possibly neither did Wiegert and Fassbender. So they seem to have reached a consensus. That particular item of evidence would simply be classified as bones, of undermined origin, and that was that. That tactical move left defense attorney Dean Strang swimming upstream when he had a chance to cross-examine the prosecution's bone expert, Dr. Leslie Eisenberg of the Wisconsin State Historical Society during the murder trial. Quote, "Now you found in the material from the quarry pile 2 fragments that appeared to you, in your experience, to be pelvic bone. Is that right?" That's correct. There were some cuts, appeared to be some cuts on those pelvic bone fragments. Yes. But you weren't able to conclude 100% certain that these were human pelvic bone fragments. Do I understand that correctly? That's correct. Eisenberg was also asked about the cut marks to the pelvic bones. Quote, "It was a long, linear cut on either side of those 2 bones that were still in proximity. They were essentially a slicing cut on one side and a sharp slicing cut on the other side." Unquote. Did it appear to your eyes that these cuts were, if you could draw any conclusion at all, that the cuts of these pelvic bones were from a smooth-edged instrument or a toothed instrument? I cannot answer your question. Because of the burning and charring of the bone itself, it was difficult to make any additional observations beyond that. If I could place those 2 adjoining fragments in anatomical position, which I was able to do, as part of the right pelvic structure, those cuts were made on either side in what I would call a north-south direction, an up and down direction. Unquote. When Strang asked if evidence tag 8675 contained multiple bone fragments, Eisenberg answered, quote, "That is correct, sir." Unquote. Then he asked her if there were separate sites where charred bones, all suspected human bones, shared the same charring and calcination. Quote, "That is correct." All of them were fragmented similarly from the 3 sites, again, human bone? That's correct. You would certainly agree that it would be very strange weather conditions indeed that would transport human bone fragments from the Avery Garage area into burn barrel number 2 on the Yonda property. In fact, I would submit that there would be no weather conditions that could make that happen. You would rule that out? I would. Likewise, the quarry pile? Yes, sir. Some bone fragments identified as human had been moved. That's correct. Now, you have no evidence that human bone fragments actually were burned at more than one site, do you? I do not know that. But the burnt bone fragments that you saw from the 3 sites, again, all were roughly similar in their burning, charring, and calcining? That is correct. When Strang finished, the prosecution had another chance to sweep away the defense theory about the suspicious pelvic bones being those of Teresa. Assistant Attorney General Tom Fallon, Sweaty Sweat Sweat's trial sidekick, asked their side's witness, quote, "As you sit here today, you cannot tell us that those bones, to a reasonable degree of anthropological or scientific certainty, are human, can you?" "I cannot." Unquote. Dr. Stephen Symes has a doctorate degree in physical anthropology, and he worked as a forensic anthropologist at the Department of the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. In 2008 and to 2009, Symes was honored with the 15th T. Dale Stewart Award, a lifetime achievement given by the American Academy of Forensic Sciences for Anthropology, recognizing him for his career, scholarship, and remarkable productivity. He served on the board of directors for the American Board of Forensic Anthropology from 2003 through 2009. His resume also noted that he is presently on call as the outside forensic anthropology consultant for Summit County, Ohio, Singapore Medical Examiner's Office, Detroit Medical Examiner's Office, Polk County Medical Examiner's Office in Des Moines, Iowa, and the Will County Medical Examiner's Office for its disaster plan. And here's a picture of him. Quote, I have testified extensively in forensic trauma to bone and surrounding tissues. The principal topic of my research and experience has been trauma injuries to the skeleton, including ballistic, blunt, burning, healing bone with specific focus on sharp force trauma, unquote. Dr. Symes was retained by Zellner to examine whether Eisenberg had sold out her soul to help the prosecution at Avery's murder trial in a win-at-all-costs scenario. Dr. Symes reviewed all known photographs taken of evidence tag 8675, the suspected human pelvic bones examined by Dr. Leslie Eisenberg. Then he reviewed all the trial testimony regarding the supposed attempts to identify the pelvic bones that were found at the Manitowoc County gravel pit. Quote, a microscopic examination of the suspected human pelvic bone performed in 2005 would have determined to a high percentage of accuracy whether the pelvic bones were human, and histological slides made in 2005 from the suspected human pelvic bones would have determined to a high percentage of accuracy whether the pelvic bones in evidence tag number 8675 were human, unquote, Dr. Symes concluded. But did Dr. Eisenberg sell out her soul, her ethics, and her integrity to make sure the state of Wisconsin achieved a murder conviction against Avery? After all, she knew how critical her testimony was to the success of the prosecution's case. Quote, it is certainly below the standard of practice for a reasonably well-qualified and competent forensic anthropologist at this current time and place to not perform microscopic and histological examinations of the possible human pelvic bones. And it may have been below the standard of practice in 2005 for a reasonably well-qualified and competent forensic anthropologist to not have performed microscopic and histological examinations of the possible human pelvic bones in evidence tag number 8675, unquote, Dr. Symes said. But there was more in his damning assessment of Dr. Eisenberg's performance. Quote, it was below the standard of practice for a reasonably well-qualified and competent forensic anthropologist to have relied exclusively upon photographs of the pelvic bones to complete the forensic examination, unquote. Third, quote, it may be below the standard of practice in 2005 for a reasonably well-qualified and competent forensic anthropologist to have performed an examination and interpretation of bone trauma without microscopic assistance, unquote. Besides Symes, Dr. John DeHaan, one of the world's leading fire and burn experts, also examined the entire Avery case files. DeHaan has worked as a forensic scientist and criminalist since 1970. DeHaan served with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office, the California Department of Justice Bureau of Forensic Services, and the U.S. Treasury Department Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He also served as president of FireX Forensics, Inc., since it formed in 1999. I have been involved with various aspects of fire and explosion investigation since 1971. In the past 12 years, I have testified as an expert witness in over 50 cases, DeHaan said, unquote. And here's his picture. In 2017, he was retained by Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates to study everything from the trial testimony, police reports, maps, photos, animated reconstructions, and forensic anthropology reports surrounding the discovery of Teresa's skeletal remains around the Avery property. For DeHaan, studying the lay of the land was critical. Avery's 40-acre square property was rural, surrounded by forests and farms. Their land is south of State Highway 147, about 5 miles east of Interstate 43, less than 10 miles northwest of Two Rivers, and about 25 miles southeast of Green Bay. The northeast corner of the Avery property had 4 business buildings, including an office, garages, and storage spaces. The residence of Alan Dolores Avery was in the northeast corner. A dirt lane led into the salvage yard where the wrecked cars were left. Another dirt lane to the south was where Chuck Avery lived. A third dirt lane ran due west of Avery Road, and this lane featured 2 trailers about 65 yards apart, each with a detached garage. Stephen Avery lived in the northeast corner trailer, and his sister Barb lived in the other trailer with her 4 sons. Quote, in the southwest corner of the Avery property, there was a dirt lane that ran immediately adjacent to the old gravel conveyor. This lane connected the Avery property to the gravel pits to the south. Within the car pit area, there were numerous dirt lanes separating rows of wrecked vehicles, unquote, Dr. DeHaan said. There were also 7 burn barrels spread out across the entire Avery parcel. Stephen Avery kept one about 40 yards northeast of his trailer. 4 more burn barrels were clustered just south of his sister Barb's trailer. The parents, Alan and Dolores Avery, had a burn barrel west of their residence. The 7th barrel was west of Chuck's domicile. All 7 barrels were regularly used to burn common garbage from the kitchen and bathrooms. Stephen Avery's burn pit behind his detached garage burned, quote, household and automotive discards, trash, and animal remains, unquote, DeHaan said. Then to the south and to the west, the Avery land was bordered by active gravel pits owned by Redont and Manitowoc County. One important distinction DeHaan made was that, quote, the Manitowoc County pit did not border the Avery property, unquote. During Avery's trial, Sweaty Sweat speculated that Teresa's body was incinerated outside using the dark skies of Halloween. Thumbs up, Nana. The circular area consisted of a mound of gravel about 1 to 2 feet high. The entire mound of gravel was about 30 feet in diameter. The burn area was rectangular, about 6 feet long. Quote, on November 8, 2005, Sergeant Jason Jost of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office observed what he suspected may be a vertebrae on the grass outside the south edge of the burn pit. The burned remains of vehicle tires, unburned tires, various hand tools, and a vehicle's bench seat were recovered in the vicinity of the burn pit, unquote. Because the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office had a reputation for sloppy and incompetent work, no examination was ever done on the wire rings from the tires, an unburned tire, a rubber mallet, a fire-damaged claw hammer, a gravel shovel, the burned vehicle seat, and burned charred metal scraper with a wooden handle. Quote, apparently, no examination was performed to establish if any trace evidence linked these items to the death of Miss Halbach or the burning of her body, unquote, DeHaan states. Here's what else the world-famous fire expert noticed. The burned debris developed a hard crust, perhaps from the heavy rains between Saturday, November 5th and Monday, November 7th. No forensic anthropologist was present during the November 8 police excavation that began around 3 p.m. Quote, crime lab personnel, untrained in anthropology, visually examined potential skeletal fragments to determine their evidentiary value. There was no effort to document from where in the burn pit certain bones were recovered or otherwise document the order for which bones were situated in the burn pit. The crime lab personnel excavating the burn pit placed items of potential evidentiary value in a single box and sent it to Dr. Leslie Eisenberg for off-site examination, unquote. Puzzling, A decision was made by the leadership team of Wiegert and Fassbender to do no further excavation at the Avery burn pit on November 9. That day came and went without any additional digging. Then, on November 10, after Avery was jailed, the Wisconsin Department of Justice was summoned to resume the excavation. Quote, again, there was no forensic anthropologist called to the scene to conduct the secondary excavation. The burn pit was first excavated by hand, then dug out using Bobcat-type front-loading tractors, unquote, Dr. Syme said. The bone fragments examined by Dr. Eisenberg led her to conclude the bones came from a woman younger than 30 to 35 shot in the head. Quote, she also concluded that a number of bone fragments showed evidence of crushing or cutting with a tool. Unquote. Keep in mind that only a portion of the skeletal remains were recovered. The remains Eisenberg examined were only 40 to 60% of the total mass of someone Teresa's size. In other words, most of Teresa's bones remained hidden. Perhaps they remained hidden underground, buried somewhere around Manitowoc County's maze of quarries and conveyor roads. Quote, Dr. Eisenberg identified that 2 bones recovered from the Manitowoc County gravel pit were still articulated, that is, they had maintained anatomical continuity, unquote, Dr. Syme said. Looking back, the manner in which processing of the burn pits was conducted in such a high-profile murder case was an embarrassment to those involved in the effort. People supposedly proficient at their jobs, people employed by the Wisconsin Department of Justice, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, and Calumet County. Quote, in this case, the minimal photographs taken before the excavation revealed very little useful information, as there were few close-up photos taken before or during the recovery excavation process. In the few photographs of the burn pit, there appeared to be numerous dried leaves that obscured nearly all identifiable detail of the material below. From Sergeant Jost and Wisconsin DOJ Special Agent Sturdivant's descriptions, it appeared that the remains showed no anatomical relationship to each other. Some remains were found outside the burn pit, and no large bones more resistant to fire were visible at all, unquote, Dr. John DeHaan said. From that point forward, Sweaty Sweat Sweat took it from there. According to John DeHaan, quote, there was no assessment of fuels associated with the fire other than describing the remains of the steel belts and beating of burned vehicle tires, unquote. Unlike the operation that dug up Avery's property, quote, I have had the opportunity to see some 50 or more unembalmed adult human cadavers exposed to a variety of real-world fires, unquote, DeHaan said. Quote, these range from accidental kitchen fires to whole room post-flashover structure fires to trench and roadside body disposals to vehicle fires to dumpster and burn barrel disposals, unquote. In fact, DeHaan works closely with 2 of the country's foremost forensic anthropologists, Dr. Allison Galloway from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Dr. Elaine Pope from the Virginia State Medical Examiner's Office. Quote, we all assist in the preparation of the demonstration fires set as practical exercises for the students, observe the fires, and document the results, unquote. In his 2012 book, he co-authored Kirk's Fire Investigation, 7th edition. DeHaan explains the human body's destruction during a fire is progressive. At first, quote, the skin shrinks, chars, and splits, exposing the subcutaneous fat. The fat renders out to support a flaming fire adjacent to the body. The muscle tissues dehydrate, char, and burn reluctantly. Extreme exposure to fire results in loss of mechanical strength. Calcined bones are usually white, blue-white, or light gray in color and are brittle and are easily broken or shattered by contact or pressure, unquote. The bone fragments in Dr. Eisenberg's photographs, quote, appeared to be coated with a yellow or tan soil or dust. Dr. Eisenberg reported that she rinsed some of the recovered bone fragments to allow detained examination, unquote. Most of the bone fragments she studied were 1 to 4 centimeters in length. Quote, many were completely calcinated with no charring or organic tissue visible, unquote, DeHaan said. Quote, others bore charred residues of organic material in the cancellous or spongy structure within, unquote. What does that mean? Okay, sorry. Quote, such damage can be induced by exposure to an open-air fire of ordinary combustibles for 6 to 8 hours or for shorter times. 3 to 4 hours in a well-ventilated fire in a metal enclosure such as a burn barrel or automobile trunk, unquote. DeHaan further explained that there is a huge distinction between fires set inside a metal enclosure and those set outside. Quote, in open-air field cremations, exposure to the flames is not uniform. There is minimal additional radiant heat, and charred masses of soft tissue will survive even a prolonged fire, particularly around the head or lower torso, unquote. Of particular interest, the heat output generated by a human body is not substantial. It's on par with an office wastebasket fire, according to DeHaan. Quote, if a body is allowed to burn undisturbed to completion in either an enclosure or a well-fueled and ventilated fire, the large bones will retain their relative anatomical position: head, neck, shoulders, upper arms, spine, hips, upper legs. The process of stoking a fire with additional lumber or stirring with an implement during its active burning will cause the mechanical destruction of the bones as they are calcined by the flames and often considerable displacement, unquote. So what was John DeHaan's analysis of the bones in Teresa's sling? Melissa, you can go into the videos here. Hold on. Will this let me get it over here? Pause. No, it won't let me. What is the deal with this thing? Facebook is so stupid. Here we go. Here's the link where you can find the videos. Okay. Can I get back to where I was? There we are, I think. All right. Quote, the appearance, size, and type of bone fragments documented, I don't know what is wrong with me today, documented in Dr. Eisenberg's forensic anthropology reports and photographs exactly mirror the fragments recovered after burn barrel cremations involving frequent stirring and stoking observed by this author. Such destruction was observed in wood-fueled burn barrel cremations in as short as 3.5 hours, unquote. In another recent criminal case where his expert analysis was sought, the accused killer described stoking a large wood-fueled pyre with several adult human bodies over the course of 15 hours, DeHaan pointed out. Later, Dr. DeHaan asserted most of the bones were crushed with rocks and wood clubs. From there, the larger identifiable body parts that survived the fire were transported to a river for disposal. Quote, the hundreds of small fragments that were recovered from the burn site were very similar in size, shape, and condition to the fragments in Dr. Eisenberg's forensic anthropology photos in this case. Note this involved no confinement except for the wood fuel and was accomplished over a span of 15 hours in an open-air burning pit, unquote. Generally, the destruction of a human body in an open pit fire takes at least 6 hours, probably longer. The burning of a body thrown into a 5-gallon steel drum distracted by getting text messages. With wood fuel can be accomplished in, quote, as little as 3.5 hours. Oh, I read that already. DeHaan is willing to put his name and reputation on the line on behalf of Steven Avery. He signed a sworn court affidavit attesting, quote, it is further my opinion that the body was not burned in the burn pit. This is based on the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the remains, the findings of similarly charred calcined fragments in burn barrels and other locations on the property, and the absence of the more massive fragments that normally resist such exposure. Quote, I disagree with Dr. Eisenberg's opinion that the main destruction of the body took place in that pit based merely on the amounts of remains recovered from the pit compared to the small fragments found elsewhere in 2 locations, one being a burn barrel from behind Barb Yanda's residence and the other a burn site in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, unquote. Even more noteworthy, quote, the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the human bones recovered from Steven Avery's burn pit indicates that Teresa Halbach's body was not burned there. Therefore, it is my opinion that someone transferred Teresa Halbach's bones to Steven Avery's burn pit, unquote. Hi, Natalie. Yeah, I know. I don't understand Facebook. So we're on chapter 21. I am on page 228 of 361 pages. DeHaan said the recovery of the victim's bones inside Bobby, the killer's, Dassey's burn barrel ties everything together. Quote, the finding of human bone fragments with similar degrees of fire damage in numerous other areas, including burn barrels on site, is also consistent with the dumping of burned remains into the pit, with some rolling away. It should be noted that there were numerous steel vessels on the salvage yard and surrounding properties that could have been used to burn a human body. These were not examined. The wood-fueled boiler and smelter were examined, and no residues were detected there, unquote. But now for the true test. Was DeHaan, a nationally recognized fire expert, willing to put his professional reputation on the line and go against a conventional wisdom to speak out against the Wisconsin police and prosecution team that assembled a successful jury verdict against Avery based on their speculation Avery's open backyard burn pit was the scene of the dismemberment? Quote, the state represented to the jury that Ms. Halbach's body was burned in an open-air burn pit behind Steven Avery's garage from around 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 31, 2005, a period of only 4 hours. Based upon my review of the descriptions and photographs of the bone fragments analyzed by Dr. Eisenberg, the state's theory is not supported by the physical evidence. Burning a body in an open-air burn pit takes 6 to 8 hours to accomplish thermal destruction to the degree I observed in Dr. Eisenberg's reports and photos. It is my opinion that the burned bones found in Steven Avery's burn pit could not have been burned to the degree I observed after 4 hours of burning in an open-air pit like the one behind Steven Avery's garage, unquote. Moreover, DeHaan adds, the state's theory that also incorrect in its assertion that the burned vehicle bench seat was used to fuel the burning of Ms. Halbach's body. The burned remains of the bench seat were not found in the burn pit but near it. Its involvement as an external fuel to aid the combustion of a body in a burn pit is speculative and unsupported by any documents I have reviewed. The state represented to the jury that the bones were fused with the metal belts in a manner that suggested that the tires from which the steel belts came were burned with the body in Mr. Avery's burn pit. Based upon my review of photographs taken on November 8, 2005 and November 10, 2005, on the occasion of the second excavation of Stephen Avery's burn pit, the bone fragments appear to simply be mixed among the metal belts." Unquote. DeHaan, president of FireX Forensics Inc. in Vallejo, California, has expert knowledge of steel-belted car tires involved in fires with human bodies. Quote, "During the fire exposure, the steel..." Why am I getting so many text messages? Okay. Okay. Quote, "During fire exposure, the steel multi-strand wires degrade, break, and fray to form bristles that readily trap any material coming into contact with them during or after the fire. Small calcined bone fragments were especially easy to trap. This has been observed in test fires where the fires were under or alongside a burned body as well as on tap." Unquote. At Avery's trial, Wisconsin Special Agent Tom Sturdivant noted how Avery's guard dog, Bear, was on a lead, quote, "sufficiently long to give him access to at least some of the burn pit. A quantity of the tire wires belting was observed to be tangled in the dog's lead at one point. Dragging the tire remains across the burned debris fragments after the fire would result in the accumulation of fragments in the wire. The burn pit may have been used previously to dispose of tires." So there was no evidence that the entrapment of the debris occurred during the fire that consumed the remains. From my review of these photographs and reports generated by law enforcement at the scene and Dr. Eisenberg in later examination, there is nothing to suggest that the tires were, in fact, burned with the human bones recovered in Stephen Avery's burn pit in the manner described by the state. Unquote, Dr. DeHaan concluded. Would Avery's murder trial have turned out differently if Buting and Strang had hired a highly regarded fire expert? And I'm saying no because his jury was fixed with people from Manitowoc. That's entirely possible. In fact, Buting and Strang had DeHaan on their mind, court files show. They contemplated hiring him, but they didn't carry through with it. Quote, "I personally went through the files of Mr. Avery's trial defense counsel, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, which they gave to our firm." God, it is so blurry with my glasses on. I really need new glasses, I guess. Which they gave to our firm when we announced we were taking on Mr. Avery's case. As I went through the files, I noticed a folder marked John DeHaan. This name stuck out to me because Ms. Zellner had consulted with John DeHaan, a forensic fire expert in this case, said Lauren Hawthorne, a law clerk for Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates. Quote, "Inside the folder was the curriculum," I don't know what that word is, vitae, V-I-T-A-E, "of Dr. DeHaan. There were no other documents in this file folder. Dr. DeHaan did not testify at Mr. Avery's trial. I checked the curriculum vitae of Dr. DeHaan from the trial defense counsel's box against a curriculum vitae provided to our office from Dr. DeHaan in 2017. I determined that the curriculum vitae of Dr. DeHaan in the trial defense counsel's box belonged to the same Dr. DeHaan that Ms. Zellner consulted." Unquote. So here's a picture, and I'm not sure, but this looks an awful lot like the picture that I took. So I don't know if Ferrick used my picture or if he went there and took the same exact picture I did. Um, Chapter 22, The Crime. Thank you, Natalie. Natalie is on top of it. This chair just always seems to go into this little groove over here off the mat on the floor. The same Manitowoc Sheriff's officials involved in Ricky Hochstetler's hit-and-run vehicular homicide in 1999 never came up with an obvious motive for pinning Avery with the Auto Trader photographer's homicide. But those cops knew collectively that Avery needed to pay, and pay hard, for his sins of bringing shame and embarrassment to their Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office. Quote, because the state did not need to establish motive, it did not spend any time trying to figure out why Ms. Halbach was murdered, unquote, Zellner said. Both Mr. Avery and Ms. Halbach are victims of a justice system whose success depends upon the integrity, competence, and devotion of judges, law enforcement, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. Both Ms. Halbach and Mr. Avery have yet to receive justice. Ms. Halbach has been all but forgotten in the rush to judgment to convict and maintain the conviction of Mr. Avery. Mr. Avery has not been forgotten, but buried alive because those individuals who were supposed to save him from a second wrongful conviction failed. Unquote. Before his prosecutorial career went down in flames and he moved far away from Wisconsin's Fox Valley area in shame, Sweaty Sweat Sweat was able to spin a courtroom tale suggesting that Avery, after raping and killing Teresa with the help of 16-year-old Brendan, got behind the wheel of her Toyota RAV4 and then drove to the far back perimeter of the salvage yard, squatting down to remove the license plates, disconnect the battery cable, then place large pieces of wood and a hood from another wrecked automobile on the RAV4. Quote, Mr. Sweaty Sweat Sweat's theory of Ms. Halbach's murder is one of the most preposterous tales ever spun in an American courtroom. If Mr. Sweaty Sweat Sweat's theory was true, then Mr. Avery is a true idiot savant, unquote, Zellner said. Quote, Mr. Sweaty Sweat Sweat, in a barrage of plot errors, creates an incongruent tale in which Mr. Avery, the savant, without wearing gloves, manages to not leave a single fingerprint in Ms. Halbach's RAV4, while Mr. Avery, the idiot, deposits 6 drops of his blood on the front seats by the ignition and on the rear door jamb. Mr. Avery, the savant, trying to save the day, manages not to leave a single drop of blood on the RAV4 door handle, key, and lanyard, hood prop, gear shift, steering wheel, or battery cables, unquote. A total of 8 latent fingerprints were recovered by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab from the doors and windows of Teresa's RAV4. However, Wiegert and Fassbender, with input from Sweaty Sweat Sweat, only wanted those fingerprints compared to a small number of potential suspects. They were let down when they learned that Avery's fingerprints were not a match. None of Avery's fingerprints were recovered from the victim's vehicle. What was the significance of the unidentified latent fingerprints? It heightened the possibility that someone other than Avery was involved in the murder or in moving Teresa's RAV4 to the edge of Avery's property on the night of Friday, November 4, 2005. Quote, to absolutely ensure that his DNA is linked to the vehicle, Mr. Avery, the idiot, locks the car and opens the hood latch so that his sweat DNA will be found on the latch, just in case the jury is smart enough to figure out that his blood in the RAV4 was planted, unquote, Zellner said sarcastically. Quote, Mr. Avery, the savant, burned the body in his burn pit in world record time of 3 to 4 hours to a point where 60% of the bones completely disappeared and all but 2 teeth evaporated. Mr. Avery, the idiot, picked out some of the larger bones and moved them to his sister's burn barrel at the Manitowoc gravel pit. As Albert Einstein once said, the difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limits. One would never imagine being convicted on such an idiotic theory, but Mr. Avery was. To understand how this happened, one must examine the other side of the coin, the performance of Mr. Avery's trial defense counsel. The state relied upon the following items of forensic evidence that allegedly linked Mr. Avery to the crime: Mr. Avery's blood in the RAV4, Mr. Avery's DNA on the hood latch, the electronic components, camera, Palm Pilot, and cell phone in Mr. Avery's burn barrel, the bones and remnants of Ms. Halbach's clothing in Mr. Avery's burn pit, the Toyota key in Mr. Avery's bedroom with Mr. Avery's DNA, and Ms. Halbach's DNA on the damaged bullet found in Mr. Avery's garage." Unquote. Zellner also realized that Avery's trial lawyers could have been much better prepared for the trial than they were. Quote, "The state convicted Mr. Avery on this ludicrous theory because trial defense counsel only had 2 experts to combat the state's 14 experts. One of the trial defense counsel's experts performed at a substandard level, and the other was not as qualified as the state's expert. Trial defense counsel claimed evidence was planted, but failed miserably in proving that assertion by lacking experts in bloodstain pattern analysis, DNA, ballistics, forensic fire, trace, forensic pathology, and police procedure and investigation. Additionally, trial defense counsel failed to conduct a thorough investigation of the victim's background, deleted cell phone calls, potential third-party suspects, or to construct an accurate timeline of Ms. Halbach and Mr. Avery's activities on October 31, 2005, unquote, Zellner said. In 2017, Zellner uncovered an egregious potential Brady violation committed by Sweaty Sweat. It concerned the behavior of Manitowoc County Sheriff's Detective Dennis Jacobs, who worked closely with Lenk. Jacobs was instrumental in retrieving the voicemail message from the house of George and Jolene Zipperer, the property on County Highway B that may have been where Teresa was headed at the time of her death. The voicemail, however, no longer exists, and quite suspiciously, it was never furnished by Sweaty Sweat to Buting and Strang for their review as part of the discovery process at the time of Avery's 2007 murder trial. Quote, "Trial defense counsel, by not carefully reviewing the discovery and not having the appropriate experts, failed to realize Mr. Avery's groin swab had been substituted for the hood latch swab by law enforcement. The key discovered in Mr. Avery's bedroom was a sub-key and was planted by Lieutenant Lenk and Sergeant Colborne immediately before its discovery. Ms. Halbach's last appointment was at the Zipperers, not the Averys, and the CD of her voicemail left on the Zipperers answering machine was concealed and or destroyed by the state to mislead the jury into believing Ms. Halbach's last stop was Mr. Avery's," Zellner said. Current post-conviction counsel has retained 10 experts and 2 investigators who have developed strong evidence that undermines confidence in Mr. Avery's verdict, unquote. And those suspicions point directly to Bobby Dassey, the killer, and his violent and abusive stepfather, Scott Toddock. Quote, "Current post-conviction counsel is providing this court with new evidence which establishes that Ms. Halbach and her vehicle left the Avery property, that Bobby Dassey, the killer, gave false testimony about Ms. Halbach and her vehicle not leaving the Avery property. That Bobby Dassey, the killer, and Scott Tadek gave false testimony, establishing each other's alibi, that the Dassey computer contains images of Ms. Halbach, violent pornography, and dead bodies of young females viewed by Bobby Dassey, the killer, at relevant time periods before and after the murder of Ms. Halbach, unquote. The two men gave themselves alibis at the time of Teresa's disappearance because they had alibied one another. During his interview with police, Bobby, the killer, told the police he was driving along State Highway 147, a highway with a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, but he somehow remembered seeing Scott Tadek driving the opposite way. But at the time of Bobby the killer's first police interview with Dietering, Bobby the killer only drew up blanks. He failed to offer up any details of this strange highway encounter, which had supposedly occurred just 5 days earlier. For instance, Bobby, the killer, could not say precisely when and where on the road he and Tadek saw each other. This raises the likelihood the story was concocted by Tadek. Quote, Bobby indicated that as he was traveling on State Highway 147 toward the property he hunts deer on, he did observe an individual known to him as Scott Tadek. Bobby, the killer, indicated that Scott would be able to verify precisely what time he had seen the killer. Bobby. The work of Zellner's investigators, however, has turned up several questions about their possible involvement in the murder and dismemberment. Quote, at 2:41 p.m., Ms. Halbach forwarded a call from her cell phone to voicemail, indicating she was preoccupied or distracted by another matter. Her cell phone was deactivated after this point in time, leading to the reasonable inference that she was assaulted and murdered at approximately 2:45 p.m. Quote, further evidentiary support of Ms. Halbach being assaulted and murdered at the cul-de-sac on Kuss Road is that the scent and cadaver dogs detected a suspected burial site immediately south of the Kuss Road cul-de-sac, unquote. In 2007, Avery's lawyers made the decision to keep their client off the witness stand and not let him to testify. That's how it's written. In his own defense, even though he always professed his innocence at the time. And they've included a picture of Stephen. Quote, on October 31, 2005, I remember that I called Ms. Halbach once before she got to the Avery property, unquote, Avery said. I called the second time at 2:35 p.m., but hung up immediately because I saw her at the van photographing it. I have had the opportunity to review my phone records to refresh my memory. Based upon my recent review of my phone records, I know that Ms. Halbach began photographing Barb's van at 2:35 p.m. It did not take Ms. Halbach longer than a minute to complete the shooting of Barb's van. When I saw her drive up and park, I was looking out my front window. When I went outside to pay Ms. Halbach, I noticed that Bobby's, the killer's, Blazer was parked in a space between my sister's trailer and garage. By the time I got to my sister's van, Ms. Halbach had already finished taking the picture of the van. I handed her $40 for the listing, and she walked to her vehicle and got in. She asked if I needed a receipt, and I told her that I didn't. She handed me an Auto Trader magazine, and I thanked her, unquote. Avery said he returned to his trailer and put the magazine down on his computer, quote, and walked back outside to go and visit my nephew Bobby, the killer. I walked to the middle of my driveway and saw Ms. Halbach's vehicle turning left on Highway 147, headed west, Avery said. I looked to my right and noticed that Bobby's Blazer was gone. Bobby did not leave before Ms. Halbach because I observed his Blazer parked by Barb's residence when I was outside with Ms. Halbach. If Bobby left a few seconds behind Ms. Halbach, I would have seen his blazer when I saw Ms. Halbach's vehicle leaving the property. I believe that Bobby left about see, this is another typo because it says Bobby left 30 seconds after Ms. Halbach because I could not see his vehicle. If he left 30 seconds after Ms. Halbach, he would have been near the intersection of the gravel drive, which leads to my and Barb's trailers, and Avery Road. It was not possible to see Bobby's blazer at that location because there was a dip and a bend in the gravel drive as it approached Avery Road, and there were buildings that blocked my view. If Bobby had left 30 seconds after Ms. Halbach, his blazer would have been in a position where I would not have been able to see it, unquote. These days, Avery's lawyer has also gained access to Bobby's, the killer's, cell phone records from around the time of the crime. Quote, Bobby stated that he would hunt on the property behind Tadek's house. Let me write this address down. ST Trailer was located at 12764 State Highway 147, which was east of the salvage yard to the right. At 3:02 p.m. on October 31, 2005, Bobby hit off Tower 363X, 5.47 miles west of the Dassey residence, which is to the left. Bobby's hunting spot was only 1.5 miles from Tower 370X. If Bobby, the killer, I've said Bobby several times and I didn't include the killer. If Bobby was hunting where he claimed to be hunting east of the Avery property, there would be no reason that his call at 3:02 p.m. would have bounced off Tower 363X west of the Avery property instead of 370X, Zellner said. Lightning alert. Back in 2007, Kratz duped people into thinking that Brendan Dassey's blue jeans had been bleached as part of a conniving plot by Avery and Brendan to literally clean every single droplet and speck of blood from Avery's garage. But this was a way for Sweaty Sweat to divert attention away from the behavior of his two deeply troubled witnesses who he needed to help make his case, Bobby, the killer, and Tadek. On March 2, 2006, Lisa Novacek, an employee at the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry, told police, quote, that on the date of Teresa Halbach's homicide, Scott Tadek did not show up for work. She said she did hear him say that he was going to see his mother in the hospital. Lisa said around the time of Stephen Avery's arrest, another girl that works with her by the name of Chris Graff had taken a phone call from a hysterical young teenage kid asking for Scott Tadek. Scott was paged, took the phone call, and left shortly after that. Scott Tadek's foreman, Keith Schaefer, informed Lisa that he was a nervous wreck when he left, unquote. According to fellow Wisconsin Foundry workers, quote, he had made a comment that there was some blood on one of the boys' clothes and that it had gotten mixed up with his laundry, unquote. Why is that laundry together? Allegedly. Natalie. Yeah, I know the trailer's not there anymore, Natalie. I've gone to the area before, but I just wanted to write down the address because I don't know if I've ever actually paid attention to what the actual address was. The identity of the hysterical teenager who called Tadek at the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry was never pursued by the police, perhaps because they realized it may expose their arrest of Avery as a sham. One thing is clear. The caller would not have been 16-year-old Brendan. He and Tadek didn't even associate with one another. The idea of Brendan having Tadek's phone number and then calling for him at work is preposterous. Older brother Bobby, the killer, on the other hand, had a close relationship with Tadek. Back in 2005, law enforcement from Manitowoc and Calumet counties agreed that they would not attempt to obtain a search warrant to obtain any DNA specimens from Scott Tadek in connection with Teresa's disappearance. A decision was also made not to compare Tadek's fingerprints with any of the fingerprints left on Teresa's RAV4 after the damaged vehicle turned up at Avery's property. In 2018, Zellner laid out for Wisconsin's judicial system, quote, the evidence supporting that Bobby was a viable third-party suspect, the killer, and had realistic ability to engineer the crime, unquote. She also reminded the court that, quote, Mr. Avery does not have to prove that Bobby, the killer, committed the crime as long as his theory is based on evidence beyond a possible ground of suspicion, unquote. Right, Natalie? That's exactly what I'm saying. Why would his laundry be mixed up with Barb's kids? Because they were having an affair and Tom Yanda is his cousin and the boys don't even really know him, yet their laundry. I mean, I can see Barb doing his laundry, but for the first time, she introduced for the court how Bobby, the killer, had an unhealthy and dangerous obsession with Teresa. Like many sadistic, psychopathic killers, Bobby's, the killer's, unhealthy obsession with violent pornography was taking over his life. Well, Kat, here's the thing. Where are those fingerprints on the car? Does it say where those fingerprints are anywhere? Because now that we have the new witness who said that Bobby was on the driver's side and then there's somebody on the passenger side, are there fingerprints over there on the passenger side pushing that car? Whose are those fingerprints at the passenger side of my best friend's ride? Okay, sorry. Court documents reveal he was spending more and more time on his personal computer when the rest of his family was not around. Bobby, the killer, did not have any girlfriends. He had an on and off thing. But he was falling into lust with young, attractive women who bore the same general characteristics to Teresa. Whenever Teresa showed up to do her auto trader assignments at Avery Salvage, Bobby, the killer, seemed to know about her presence. Quote, Bobby had developed an obsession with Ms. Halbach and on a number of occasions watched her from the window. The following day after her visits, Bobby commented about her, indicated that he was watching her. Because of Bobby's obsessive and compulsive preoccupation with viewing violent pornography of women who resembled Ms. Halbach, he developed violent sexual fantasies about her, unquote. And then there's a picture of Kathleen's recreation video of Bobby getting her to stop at Cuss Road. In March of 2006, Sweaty Sweat held his infamous press conference advising minors not to listen to what he was about to reveal. Although Sweaty Sweat sustained a murder conviction, most people agree the murder could not have possibly happened the way Kratz described the crime. The scientific evidence does not support his story. After devoting more than 2.5 years to reinvestigating the case, Zellner offered her own theory on how Teresa died to the Manitowoc County Circuit Court in her 30-page motion for post-conviction relief filed August 3, 2018. Going on 3 years for that one. Here it is, quote, upon Miss Halbach's arrival on October 31, 2005, Bobby, the killer, watched her from his window, as he had in the past, but denied to the police that he was aware that she was coming to the property. As Ms. Halbach left the property, Bobby followed. Ms. Halbach was persuaded to pull over in the Cuss Road cul-de-sac area and open her rear cargo door to obtain her camera for a photograph. Advances were made, a struggle ensued, and Ms. Halbach was knocked to the ground and hit by a rock, causing blood spatter to land on the inside of the rear cargo door of her RAV4. Would luminol still detect blood on the road at the cul-de-sac, even though it's been exposed to the Wisconsin elements all these years? Ms. Halbach was lifted into the rear of the RAV4 and driven to the area of the suspected burial site, assaulted, and then driven back to the Avery property. The hair bloodstain patterns on the inside panel of the rear cargo area of the RAV4 were created by Ms. Halbach's injured head as the car was driven back to the Avery salvage yard. The RAV4 was pulled into the Dassey garage, and Ms. Halbach was shot twice in the head. The Dassey garage was never luminoled or checked for forensic evidence of any type. Blood found between the Dassey garage and residence was never tested." Unquote. Another suspicious lead, pointing toward Tadek's possible involvement in Teresa's murder, went by the wayside by the Calumet County Sheriff's Office. On March 31, 2006, Jay Mathis, an employee at the Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry in Manitowoc, told investigator Wendy Baldwin, a waste of life. What does Kat say? Hold on, sorry. There is the bloody handprint on the back of the RAV that's never been tested. Probably fingerprints on the driver's side and passenger side that's never been tested. And you know the state is not going to allow that RAV if it's still in evidence to be tested. Yeah, another of the mysteries of why Kathleen has not gotten to do her own testing on the RAV. That just shows you that the state doesn't care about justice and truth. Okay. Quote, "He has known Scott Tadek for approximately 8 years. He said he had been interested in buying a .22 for his kid and told Scott about it because he was on a forklift and could find out if anyone had a gun for sale. Jay said about a week ago, Scott said he had a .22 Savage for sale that belonged to one of Barbara's kids. They agreed on a price of $100. Jay said it had a scope on it and figured it was a rifle and not a pistol. Scott approached him and told him he could go out to his truck and look at it. Jay told Scott he was not interested in looking at the gun that particular day and told him he was going to wait until the weekend." Unquote. Then, when Mathis inquired about the gun later, Tadek acted weird. Quote, "Scott told him he never had the gun and the kid wanted to keep it now and it was not for sale." Jay described Scott as not being hooked up right, as has seen him fly off the handle at everyone at work. And then there's another picture of the recreation video. And so this one is of Bobby, the killer, picking up Teresa. Truth be known, Tadek was a familiar name and face around law enforcement circles at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and in Two Rivers, where he grew up. Without any doubt, his propensity toward violence was tenfold compared to Stephen Avery. In fact, Tadek's temper makes Avery look like a little lamb. Yet Manitowoc County deputies who knew both men, Tadek and Avery, gave Tadek a free pass when it came to his version of events and his claims of an alibi. but they chose to disregard and not believe Avery in his repeated denials of guilt when it came to Teresa's disappearance. On December 27, 1997, Tadek, then 29, had one of his many violent dust-ups, this one involving his mother, Patricia Tadek. Which I always wonder why... Has anybody ever asked his mother if Scott was there at the hospital during the day? Why don't you ask his mother? Police who handled that call on Cottage Lane in Two Rivers Township included Manitowoc County Deputy Greg Shetter, Sergeant James Lenk, where have we heard that name before? And two other county deputies. Quote, the complainant is informed by the reports of Deputy Shetter that upon speaking with Patricia Tadek, her son, Scott Tadek, came to the residence through the front door without knocking or receiving any type of permission. Patricia stated Scott informed her that he came to pick up his fishing equipment. Patricia stated Scott immediately noticed some of the fishing items had been moved and became angry about this. When Scott questioned her about this, Patricia stated she informed Scott that she needed to remove some of the fishing items due to the fact it was blocking a doorway and she needed to get through the door. Scott became very angry and some of his fishing equipment was missing and began yelling obscenities such as, "Don't blame me, Facebook. It's here in print. Don't shoot the messenger." If you've got kids, earmuffs. Ready? Fucker, bitch, a cunt, and a loser. Towards his mother, Patricia. When she asked him to calm down, Scott told her he did not have to calm down. Scott came up to her and shoved his weight into the left side of her body, which caused her to almost fall. Patricia stated she did have some trouble breathing and did have minor pain to her left side and shoulder area. Patricia stated at this time she became extremely upset and continued to be scared that Scott would cause more injury to her, unquote. At that point, she asked her other son, William, to come over. "Get the hell out of here," William barked at his brother. "I'm not leaving all my stuff," Scott Tadek snapped. A physical altercation ensued. William pushed his brother, causing Scott Tadek to fall into the pickup truck parked in the driveway. When Scott tried to get up, William pushed Scott again. The cowardly brother, who had verbally demeaned and attacked his own mother, now wanted to get out of Dodge. Quote, Scott then entered his vehicle and left the area. William stated Scott attempted to push back and fight back during the altercation, but did not injure William in any way, unquote. For that offense, Scott Tadek was charged by Manitowoc County in January 1998 with unlawfully entering the dwelling of another without their consent. That's it. 4 years prior, on July 17, 1994, Tadek was charged with unlawfully entering the dwelling of another without their consent and with unlawfully and intentionally causing bodily harm to another. The Two Rivers Police Department criminal complaint states that Tadek struck and injured Martin LeClaire. A Two Rivers police officer was summoned to the residence of Constance Wellnetz on Jackson Street at 3:05 a.m. She told police that, quote, at approximately 3 a.m., she was asleep with Martin LeClaire when she heard a hard knock on their bedroom window. Constance stated she believed it was Scott Tadek as he had done this in the past. Hello, Gwen. Later, she heard another knock. It was at the back door. Quote, Constance stated that Martin decided to go outside to speak with Scott to tell him to stop harassing her. Constance stated she told Martin not to go outside and she was going to call the police. Constance stated she heard some banging and shouting outside as she was trying to see she lost a connection with the police. Constance stated at this time Scott walked into her residence without her permission and stated, and I'm just reading this Facebook, don't blame me, quote, "You will die for this, bitch," unquote. Constance ran outside. She found Martin LeClaire laying in the driveway. He had endured a savage beating. Quote, "He was covered in blood and had a cut on his head." Officer Mark Sheld spoke with Martin LeClaire, who stated at approximately 3:15 a.m. someone was pounding on the bedroom window and then knocking on the door, and they believed it was Scott Tadych. Martin stated he got dressed and went outside to confront Scott. Martin stated they began to argue and were pushing each other, and Scott swung at Martin and struck him on the side of the face with a closed fist, and Scott struck him with an unidentified object in his head, and he believes he was unconscious for a brief time, but he can't remember until he was in the house and the police were there. At no time did he give anyone permission to strike him or cause him injury. Who gives somebody permission to strike them? Unquote. Scott Tadych's rage and his threats of violence did not slow down as he grew older. In January 2001, 4 years before Teresa vanished, he was the respondent of a restraining order filed at the Manitowoc County Courthouse. The document reflects that on January 4, 2001, Tadych, quote, "called me at work 7 times within a 25-minute period, threatened to kick my ass and turn me over to social services and just plain make my life miserable. Called me a," don't blame me, "fucking cunt bitch," unquote. Tadych had summoned a friend named Scotty to call the woman, quote, "and ask when I was going to pay him the $42 that I owed him. I told Scott to stop calling me and not to follow in Scott Tadych's footsteps. December 20, 2000, Scott Tadych started calling my house at 10:10 a.m. He called 5 times within a 20-minute period. I kept hanging up on him," unquote. Scott owes me money. Maybe I should do some name calling, huh? The previous day, December 30, 2000, quote, "I was getting ready to go out and at about 7 p.m. my phone rang. I answered it. It was Scott again. At that time, someone knocked on my back door. Scott asked what I was doing. I said, answering the door, stop calling here, and hung up. I opened the back door. It was Scott, and he pushed his way into my house. I told him to leave. He would not, and started screaming and yelling and moving about my house, calling me a cunt, slut, bitch. Finally, I picked up the phone and said if he didn't leave, I would call police. He left, slamming my back door, knocking off the wreath. I then witnessed and heard him beating on my vehicle and saw him try all the doors to get into the vehicle. Then he spit on my vehicle. Oh, sorry, ladies. He's taken. And men. Terrified, the women sneaked over to the gas station, thinking this was a safe place to hide out. Quote, "Scott followed me there and kept driving by all the while I was in Quick Trip. When I was done, I went to leave. I backed out of the parking space and Scott blocked me from leaving for about 2 minutes. After he moved, I went directly to Two Rivers Police Department to report what Scott had been doing," unquote. Even while the woman was giving her statement to the police, Tadych continued to call her. Quote, "After I was done with police, I went out. Scott started calling my cell phone from a number belonging to Joanne LaRose. I answered, and Scott said that if I didn't talk to him and give him another chance, he would ruin my life because I was a worthless piece of shit and he would hurt me. I hung up," unquote. On June 24, 2002, Tadych was charged with causing a disturbance with Constance Wellnuts. That March 14, a Two Rivers officer was dispatched to the Tadych house for a disorderly incident. The victim told police she had, quote, "just gotten into a verbal and physical altercation with her ex-boyfriend, Scott Tadych. She tried to kick Tadek out of her residence because he yelled at her son, Ryan, for getting up late for school. According to Wellnetz, Tadek then threatened to make their lives a living hell. She further stated that Tadek had shoved her up against a wall and struggled with her to take the phone away, unquote. The woman got her son and daughter out of the house and drove them to school. Quote, Wellnetz further stated that Tadek returned to their residence and was threatening to kill her and himself. According to Wellnetz, Tadek took her keys and threw his watch and keys at her. When Wellnetz called 911, Tadek left the residence, unquote. When Two Rivers police responded, they saw the woman's wrist was cut and a bathroom door yanked off the hinge. Quote, Wellnetz stated that it was the wrist that Tadek was struggling to get the phone from. She also stated that she was punched twice by Tadek in the right shoulder and that he had used a closed fist, unquote. What is that? According to court records, here's a summary of Tadek's criminal history in Manitowoc County prior to the disappearance and murder of Teresa Halbach. Here we go. November 1994, guilty of battery, 30 days jail time, probation for 1 year. July 1997, physical abuse of a child was downgraded to battery, probation for 18 months and 60 days jail. Charges of disorderly conduct and criminal damage to property got dismissed under the plea. December 1997, criminal trespass to a building. Sentence involved a fine. A disorderly conduct charge was dropped under the plea. July 2002, disorderly conduct. Sentence withheld. Tadek got put on probation through the Department of Corrections for 18 months. He needed to continue with counseling and take his prescribed medications, perform community service, maintain a full-time job, and pay court fines, including a domestic violence surcharge. On February 15, 2004, Tadek was discharged from his probation. Here's what Zellner has to say about Tadek and her contention that he is a suspected accomplice in the dismemberment and disposal of Teresa's remains. Quote, we have received several tips about Tadek being very careful not to leave anything with his DNA on it so that someone could retrieve it. That's cigarettes at the rallies. Zellner told the author. He refused to give us blood for a DNA methylation experiment. Tadek's reluctance to provide his DNA has only increased our suspicion of him. Mr. Avery's complete willingness to have further testing performed has solidified my view that he is 100% innocent, unquote. But not everyone is rooting for Zellner to succeed. There remain a number of fierce loyalists, mainly people whose family members, relatives, and dear friends either work in Wisconsin law enforcement or had a role in bringing murder charges against Avery. Along with several high-ranking members of Wisconsin's political government, people including Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and his right-hand man, Attorney General Brad Schimmel, who once played in a band with former Manitowoc County Special Prosecutor Sweaty Sweat Sweat. They have doubled down and put forth a relentless quest to make sure Avery stays a condemned and convicted murderer, just as they have done with Brendan Dassey, who most people are sure is innocent. Quote, I couldn't care less about the opinions of those who think I am trying to free a murderer, Zellner told the author. All of the individuals I have exonerated were believed to be guilty until they walked out of the prison gates. I have not read a single article, social media post, or book from a guilter that is not riddled with factual inaccuracies, legal misperceptions, or profound ignorance. The Achilles heel of this group is their leader, a discredited and disgraced prosecutor whose unethical behavior has exceeded anything my legal experts have encountered in any other post-conviction case in the country. Unquote. Bum, bum, bum. Chapter 23. It's titled Ken Kratz. Sweaty, sweat, sweat. Quote, that same ugly picture depicted in Kratz's official sexual misconduct with women appears in Kratz's solicitation of Avery. Kratz acted out of his own self-interest in an utterly unethical way, abused his professional office, and engaged in conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. Unquote. Bennett L. Gershman, State of New York, County of Westchester, sworn affidavit of May 10, 2017. Here we go. In the legal profession, prosecutors generally abide by the rules of professional conduct inside the courtroom and surrounding the rights of the accused. But every so often, an oily person can infiltrate the criminal justice system in a way that does great harm to America's confidence in their public officials who take an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect the civil liberties and rights of the accused. Every once in a blue moon, someone like Sweaty Sweat Sweat comes around and is able to play the system to his own advantage because he's confident nobody else will dare challenge him. Luckily for everyone, the voting public, police officers, and criminal defense lawyers, there are checks and balances in the legal system. That's why, in all likelihood, the same man responsible for obtaining successful murder convictions against Avery and Brendan Dassey, despite presenting two completely different scenarios in their trials of how Teresa's murder happened, will likely be the eventual fall guy. The poster child for the Avery murder case's implosion when that day comes. For every sweaty sweat who poisons the criminal justice system and brings shame and embarrassment to other hard-working, noble, and conscientious criminal prosecutors, defense lawyers, and judges, there is someone on the opposite spectrum. Someone with a sterling reputation such as Bennett L. Gershman, a highly distinguished state of New York lawyer whose credentials are 1,000 times stronger than those of Sweaty Sweat. And here's his picture. Gershman worked from 1996 to 1972 as an assistant New York County District Attorney, handling homicides, rackets, appeals, and major felonies. Quote, I presented hundreds of cases to grand juries and tried numerous felony cases to verdict. Unquote. From 1972 to 1976, Gershman was an assistant attorney general in the New York State Special Prosecutor's Office that was charged with investigating official and political corruption in New York City. Quote, I was the chief of the Appeals Bureau and the Bronx Anti-Corruption Bureau, where I investigated cases, presented cases to special grand juries, and prosecuted many public officials, including judges, prosecutors, attorneys, police officers, and other public officials charged with corrupt, fraudulent, and dishonest conduct. Unquote. These days, Gershman serves as a tenured professor of law at the Elizabeth Hobb School of Law at Pace University in New York. He has taught there since 1976. He teaches classes on criminal law, criminal procedure, constitutional law, trial practice, and professional ethics. Bet you Kratz doesn't know anything about ethics. Quote, during my academic career, I have served as a defense attorney representing many persons charged with serious felonies, including murder, rape, organized crime, and drug cases, unquote, Gershman said. Quote, I have testified as an expert witness in judicial proceedings and before the United States Congress, the New York State Legislature, and various professional and fact-finding commissions, unquote. Gershman also provided a legal opinion on January 6, 2017, for the nomination of Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General of the United States. Gershman has written a treatise on the ethical duties of prosecutors called Prosecutorial Misconduct, Second Edition, Thomson West, and a treatise, on the criminal trial called Criminal Trial Error and Misconduct, that delves into errors and misconduct involving a judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, and jury, and what can be done to challenge the misconduct after the fact. Quote, I often lecture to judges, prosecutors, bar associations, and other professional and civic groups, unquote, Gershman said. One lawyer who never attended one of Gershman's lectures is Sweaty Sweat Sweat. Quote, for a prosecutor, the press conference is the most powerful forum in which to communicate with the public. A press conference gives the prosecutor the opportunity to express in a dramatic way the results of an investigation, the crimes being charged, and the involvement of the persons accused of committing those crimes. Because there is a risk that the press conference can prejudice the right of an accused to a fair trial, ethics rules strictly circumscribe what a prosecutor can say at a press conference, unquote. According to Gershman, Kratz's back-to-back press conferences held on March 1 and 2, 2006, quote, constituted professional misconduct. Sweaty Sweat Sweat, an experienced prosecutor, knew that a prosecutor is not allowed to disparage the character and reputation of an accused, disclose the existence of a confession or other physical evidence, discuss any information that is likely to be inadmissible in evidence, and express an opinion on a defendant's guilt. Sweaty Sweat Sweat knew that his statements would make it virtually impossible for anyone watching his press conference to keep an open mind about the case and the guilt of the defendants. Sweaty Sweat Sweat knew what he had accomplished, unquote. At the first news conference, Sweaty Sweat Sweat declared that law enforcement, quote, now has a definitive set of answers as to what happened to Teresa Halbach, and we know exactly what to look for and where to look for it, unquote. The next day, March 2, Sweaty Sweat claimed, quote, we have now determined what occurred sometime between 3:45 p.m. and 10 or 11 p.m. on the 31st of October, unquote. But why would someone in Kratz's position step over the line and commit prosecutorial misconduct as Gershman outlines? For starters, Kratz would have known he was invincible at the time. In other words, there were no higher powers and authority to call him out and hold him accountable. Therefore, there was no misconduct except in the minds of the disenfranchised. Quote, more than any other government official, a prosecutor is viewed by the public with esteem and trust, Gershman said. The public looks to the prosecutor as the official most responsible for vindicating the rule of law and punishing wrongdoers. Given Kratz's prestige and prominence as the special prosecutor by the governor to lead the investigation, Kratz's assertions that law enforcement had solved the case would almost certainly be greeted by the public with both relief that the perpetrators had been apprehended and an outcry to punish them, unquote. During the March 2 press conference, Kratz suggested Avery shackled, raped, tortured, and butchered Teresa to death. Quote, Kratz knew at the time of his March 2 press conference that every statement he made accusing Avery of the horrific acts against Teresa Halbach was based exclusively on the uncorroborated confession of a 16-year-old Brendan Dassey, which has recently been found by a federal court to have been coerced by police, unquote, Gershman said. Quote, Kratz knew that Dassey was of borderline intelligence, attended special education classes, and was known as a mild-mannered, introverted young man who was never before in trouble with the law. Dassey's confession presented a narrative that was totally different than the version Kratz used in filing the original murder charges against Avery, and Dassey's confession was legally inadmissible against Avery for constitutional and statutory reasons. In short, Kratz had no evidence and therefore no legal basis to support the new charges of sexual assault and torture against Avery contained in the amended complaint and announced at the press conference. Unquote. Deep down, Kratz also knew something the general public did not know, and it was something he very much did not want people and the gullible lapdog members of the Wisconsin press to report. Here's what it was. Quote, Kratz knew that a 4-month police investigation that had conducted at least 8 separate searches of Avery's trailer, garage, and every part of the property had yielded no forensic or physical evidence to corroborate Dassey's confession. A prosecutor engages in professional misconduct when he makes unwarranted claims and brings unwarranted criminal charges. Picture of this press conference. Moreover, in bringing charges that are not legally and factually sustainable, Kratz engaged in professional misconduct for another reason. Prosecutors are commanded not to prosecute a charge that the prosecutor knows is not supported by probable cause. Kratz knew that he lacked sufficient evidence to charge Avery with the acts described in Dassey's confession. Dassey's confession, as Kratz surely knew, was inadmissible against Avery under the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Dassey's confession was also inadmissible against Avery because it violated a fundamental rule of evidence barring use of statements that are hearsay. Unquote. But what was Kratz's motivation in holding a press conference, making inflammatory assertions against Avery, knowing what he was saying was not true? Quote, he lacked probable cause, indeed, any factual basis whatsoever, to file his amended complaint charging Avery with the additional crimes of sexual assault and torture, and then publicly announced those new charges to the world. In my opinion, Kratz brought these new charges against Avery in bad faith. Kratz brought these new charges. Oh, wait, I read that already. He knew that he would not be able to present these facts against Avery to a jury, as demonstrated by his decision to drop the sexual assault and kidnapping charges on February 2, 2007. He disclosed these facts publicly, knowing that they would be heard by prospective jurors and used to prejudice Avery. By charging without proper factual basis and then representing in official court documents and in his public statements that those charges were validly brought, Kratz engaged in fraudulent, dishonest, deceitful, and misleading conduct. Unquote. In fact, Kratz's behavior in the case was so far over the top that he, quote, thereby violated the attorney's oath by advancing facts prejudicial to the reputation of a party without any legitimate reason by law or justice to do so, unquote, Gershman's affidavit notes. Quote, it is one thing for a co-defendant like Dassey to make allegations that implicate himself and others. It is a far different thing for a prosecutor not only to repeat those statements publicly, but also to endorse them as the truth, particularly when there is no factual basis to confirm their validity. All of Kratz's references to Avery alleged heinous acts were gratuitous, without any legitimate basis in fact or law, without any legitimate law enforcement reason, and destroyed Avery's character, his ability to receive a fair trial, and his constitutional right to the presumption of innocence. Collectively, Kratz's statements were offensive to the fair and proper administration of justice and the integrity of our system of justice and demonstrated Kratz's unfitness as a prosecutor. Unquote. Kratz's egregious behavior ensured Avery's life was ruined and he became a pariah in his community. Just as Kratz successfully portrayed Avery during his term representing the voters of Calumet County, who kept electing and re-electing Kratz time and time again as their arbiter of justice. Quote, although the prosecutor is allowed to prosecute with earnestness and vigor and may strike hard blows, he is not at liberty to strike foul ones, unquote, Gershman said. Quote, constitutional and ethical rules impose a special obligation on prosecutors to serve and vindicate the truth and administer justice. Thus, a prosecutor violates due process and his ethical duty to serve the truth when he presents inconsistent and irreconcilable theories at two different trials against two different defendants. Such conduct is inherently unfair, deserves the truth, and renders any resulting conviction unreliable. Unquote. Many people familiar with the plight of Avery and his nephew are totally oblivious to the fact that after Kratz obtained a murder conviction against Avery, Kratz went on to convict Brendan Dassey based on a totally different set of allegations and theories as far as Teresa's murder was concerned. Something crazy and ridiculous like this only happens in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. No, it doesn't. Look at Lake County, Illinois. According to Gershman, here are some of the many examples showing how Kratz stayed outside the boundaries of professionalism and credulity. From Avery's trial, quote, all of the evidence points to one person. That's the one person being responsible. I'm going to argue at the conclusion of this case who that one person is. I bet you can guess who I'm going to suggest was responsible, unquote. From Dassey's trial, quote, Kratz claimed that Brendan Dassey killed Teresa Halbach, or at least participated in her killing with Avery. Kratz claimed that she was killed by Avery stabbing her in the stomach, Dassey slitting her throat, Avery manually strangling her, and then incidentally adding a gunshot. He argued she was killed in Avery's trailer, not his garage, unquote. But at Avery's trial, quote, he argued no blood was found in the trailer. But since Teresa wasn't killed in the trailer, there shouldn't be. She was not killed in the trailer. Where was Teresa killed? This is an easy answer, or at least it is an answer that is directed by all the physical evidence in this case. She was killed in Stephen Avery's garage, unquote. At Avery's trial, Kratz alerted the jury, quote, we will actually be arguing to you that Mr. Avery handled that weapon in his hands when Ms. Halbach was killed. Teresa's death was caused by 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Teresa's future aspirations were snuffed out by one act, and by one act by one person, unquote. But nobody in Wisconsin's judicial system, notably the Manitowoc County presiding judge Jerome Fox for Dassey's trial, called out Kratz's antics as being inappropriate. Kratz's inability to offer completely different theories against co-defendants for the same murder drew a free pass from the judge. Quote, Kratz's inconsistent contentions at the Avery and Dassey trials violate due process as well as a prosecutor's duty to promote the truth and serve justice. A prosecutor may not advance or separate trials, theories of guilt which cannot be reconciled factually. Kratz could not, in good faith, argue at Avery's trial that Avery was the only killer, and then argue at Dassey's trial that Avery, along with Dassey, killed Teresa Halbach. Kratz could not, in good faith, argue at Avery's trial that Halbach's death was caused by gunshot wounds, and then argue at Dassey's trial that her death was caused by stab wounds to her stomach and throat and manual strangulation, as well as gunshots. Kratz could not, in good faith, argue in Avery's trial that Halbach was killed in the garage, and then argue in Dassey's trial that she was killed in Avery's trailer. Kratz's theories negate one another. His claims are inconsistent and irreconcilable. Such flip-flopping conduct by a prosecutor is inherently unfair, legally and ethically, and undermines the very concept of justice and the duty of a prosecutor to serve truth. A prosecutor cannot engage in such gamesmanship. Such conduct destroys confidence in the integrity of the system of justice and the constitutional and ethical precept that the prosecutor's goal is to serve justice rather than winning convictions." Unquote. But since Kratz was not a man of ethics or integrity, he also had no shame in writing a book intended to sabotage Avery's long-term prospects of ever getting justice and a new trial. And I've read that book in here in our live videos too, so don't give that man any money. Part of the information that Kratz contained in his 2017 book, The Case Against Steven Avery and What Making a Murderer Gets Wrong, came from information that Avery's trial judge, Patrick Willis, had sealed and therefore was not part of the court record at the time of Avery's trial. Quote, Kratz's book and media appearances describe in vivid detail how he claims Avery sexually assaulted his ex-wife, his former girlfriend, his niece, and his babysitter, his horrific torture of a cat, and a variety of other violent criminal acts, unquote, Gershman said. Quote, indeed, these allegations parallel the inflammatory allegations Kratz made against Avery in his sealed motion to Judge Willis. To be sure, the First Amendment protects Kratz's freedom to publish and talk about his book. But as an attorney and former lead prosecutor in the Avery and Dassey cases, Kratz's free speech rights are constrained by ethical rules. Although Judge Willis unsealed the motion after Avery was convicted, the publishing of this information was unnecessary and would certainly be prejudicial to future jurors if Avery was successful in seeking a new trial. Kratz's book is an inaccurate and inflammatory attack on the popular Netflix series Making a Murderer, unquote. From Gershman's perspective, quote, there appears to be no legitimate reason for Kratz to disseminate this inflammatory information. Although Avery and Dassey cases have attracted widespread interest and were the subject of a 10-part Netflix series, Making a Murderer, Kratz was in a unique position that was different from all other journalists and commentators. Kratz was the lead prosecutor against Avery and Dassey. Kratz was privy to considerable confidential information that had not been officially revealed. Ethical standards specifically address the question of the extent to which a former prosecutor is allowed to reveal secret information obtained in confidence while investigating and prosecuting a criminal matter, unquote. But even more appalling behavior by Kratz began in 2013, after he had already been forced to resign from office in shame and disgrace. By that point, he had retreated to far northwestern Wisconsin, where he was struggling to make it in private practice as a criminal defense attorney in Superior, Wisconsin. Kratz's correspondence to Avery included outlandish requests pressuring Avery to add him to his prisoner list of visitors. Kratz further badgers Avery in his correspondence on September 6, 2015. Quote,
Since I'm the person who probably knows more about your case than anyone else, I hope that you would choose me to tell your story to. Unfortunately, you only want to consider or to continue your nonsense about being set up. That's too bad, because you had one opportunity to finally tell all the details, but now that will never happen." Unquote. Gershman maintains that in all of his years of practicing law and studying the ethics and misconduct of prosecutors, he has never once witnessed someone like Kratz. Quote, "Kratz's conduct in approaching the man he vilified brought unsubstantiated charges against, convicted of murder, and sent to prison for life without parole in order to tell his story is unlike any conduct of any ex-prosecutor I have ever encountered," Gershman said. Kratz's conduct is offensive to the proper administration of justice. His intimidation and manipulation for his own selfish motive of the person he prosecuted impairs the dignity of the legal profession and the ethical responsibility of lawyers to abstain from overreaching, harassing, and manipulative conduct. Unquote. In Gershman's purview, Kratz's ploy to convince Avery into believing that Kratz would be inclined to write an honest book from Avery's perspective is another falsehood that erodes at the credibility of the judicial system. Quote, "Kratz's solicitation of Avery is akin to a personal injury lawyer's solicitation of cases from recent accident victims, dubbed ambulance chasing. Such conduct has seriously impaired the reputation of the bar." Did you know in Wisconsin you don't have to pass the bar to be a lawyer? And Kratz didn't pass the bar. Kratz's conduct, in my opinion, is even more nefarious. Kratz had a personal involvement with Avery and sought to manipulate that connection under the guise of appearing to act on Avery's behalf to help him tell his honest story so that the public would understand both sides. But of course, Kratz's appeal for Avery's cooperation, ostensibly for disinterested motives, was a sham. Kratz wanted to write a book and get the person he prosecuted to help him. His solicitation was disingenuous and prejudicial to the administration of justice. Unquote. But here's why things get even more interesting. Quote, "There is an uncanny parallel between Kratz's solicitation of Avery as a private lawyer and Kratz's solicitation of vulnerable women when he was a prosecutor. In 2010, Kratz was investigated by the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation for sending inappropriate text and email messages to women, including victims in active domestic abuse cases Kratz was then prosecuting. There was at least 10 women who complained about Kratz's improper sexual overtures to them. The state investigation led the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association to call for Kratz's resignation, for Governor James Doyle to initiate removal proceedings against Kratz, and after Kratz involuntarily resigned, for the Office of Lawyer Regulation in 2011 to bring a disciplinary complaint against Kratz, alleging several counts of professional misconduct. Unquote. Afterward, Gershman notes, Kratz was suspended from practicing law in Wisconsin for 4 months. In one case where Kratz was prosecuting a parental rights termination case, Kratz became lustful toward the woman involved in the case, telling her, "Earmuffs," and here we go, "I won't come in your mouth," and later informing her that he was leaving on a wild trip to Las Vegas where he could have big boob women serve me drinks. Kratz commented in court to a social worker that the court reporter had big, beautiful breasts And another time, he contacted a young woman almost 30 years younger than he was, inquiring if she was the kind of girl that liked secret contact with an older elected DA. The riskier, the better. You may be the tall, young, hot nymph, but I am the prize, Kratz had texted her. Indeed, Kratz, the 3-time divorced Wisconsin lawyer, was in a league of his own. Time after time, women found him repulsive and did not want anything to do with him. Quote, Kratz tried to defend his appalling behavior towards the women by raising incredible, inconsistent, hyper-technical, and puzzling arguments, Gershman said. His claim that he wanted to amicably resolve the disciplinary proceedings, according to Wisconsin Supreme Court, borders on the intellectually insulting. Kratz's insistence that his conduct resulted from addiction to drugs does not change the ugly picture by the record, unquote. But there was also something at play. There was a pattern developing. Quote, interestingly, quite similar allegations in the disciplinary proceedings against Kratz are present in Kratz's solicitation of Avery. Thus, in the disciplinary proceeding, Kratz was found to have acted with a selfish motive, manipulated a vulnerable woman, engaged in exploitative behavior, engaged in harassing behavior, showed a crass placement of his personal interests above those of his client, and crossed the line separating the unprofessional conduct from the acutely offensive and harassing, Gershman pointed out, unquote. However, there is no indication Kratz was pursuing Avery for sexual reasons, like the women who were domestic violence victims he tried to seduce. Quote, but as a matter of professional ethics, Kratz's conduct towards Avery was as intimidating, self-interested, and manipulative as it was to the woman Kratz abused. Avery was in a hopeless position and an easy target for Kratz's solicitations. Kratz knew the prison authorities had objected to Avery speaking to Kratz and that Kratz's overtures might hurt Avery. Particularly disingenuous was Kratz's ploy to suggest falsely that Kratz was simply a disinterested person trying to assist Avery to tell his story, his honest story, to the world, but knowing full well that he wanted Avery's story only if Avery told his story in a way that served Kratz's selfish interests in writing a book and promoting himself. Kratz exploited his former status as Avery's prosecutor, who knows more about your case than anyone. Kratz disparaged Avery's continued nonsense about being set up. He intimidated Avery as he did with the women he abused, trying to convince Avery to talk to him by the veiled threat that it was too bad that Avery refused to talk to him because you had the opportunity to finally tell all the details, but that will never happen, unquote. Gershman's curriculum vitae notes he has authored 4 books. He has also written about 24 law review articles, including writings on litigating Brady versus Maryland, reflections on Brady versus Maryland, prosecutorial ethics and victims' rights, witness coaching by prosecutors, and the prosecutor's duty to truth. As for Kenneth R. Kratz, the Wisconsin Bar Association online directory indicates he graduated from Marquette University's law school in 1985 and was admitted to practice law in Wisconsin on May 20, 1985. But as of November 2018, the Wisconsin Bar Association listed Kratz's law license as being suspended for 3 different reasons: dues, CLE, which is continuing legal education, and for OLR certification. The Office of Lawyer Regulation was an agency within the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The website domain on file with the Wisconsin Bar Association for the Kratz law firm was also for sale. Hello, David. And goodbye. That's going to end today's reading. So we will be live on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central, where we will start at chapter 24. That's titled Creepy Kratz, and is page 266 of 361. So that will be on Wednesday. But let me just add that whole thing with Kratz wanting Stephen to put him on his visitors list and all that stuff, Stephen was playing with him. So Stephen inquiring with Kratz about maybe Kratz even being able to represent him and coming to visit him and all that stuff is just Stephen laying out some line to see if he can get the sucker fish to bite. Just because Stephen has a low IQ, it doesn't mean he's stupid. You know, he's not educated, but he's got a good sense of humor and knows some things. So yeah, so he was just seeing what would end up happening with Kratz on that whole thing. So while Kratz was trying to manipulate Stephen there, Stephen wasn't buying it and was just seeing if he could get Kratz to trip up. So he's so gross. And I can't believe when we get started on Wednesday, we're going into a chapter titled Creepy Kratz. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. Like I said, we will go live again on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central. And we'll see how far we get. And depending on what happens on the reading on Wednesday, we'll then determine if we have to read some more and when that will be. No problem, David. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. Investigation continues. I'll see you on Wednesday.